SQL interview questions and answers 121 to 130. Question number 121. In what version of SQL Server were synonyms released? How do synonyms work and explain its use cases? Synonyms were released in SQL Server 2005. Yes, that's correct. Synonyms were introduced in SQL Server 2005. A synonym is a database object that acts as an alias for another database object referred to as the base object. Its main purpose is to provide an alternative name for an object that can exist on a local or remote server, and to abstract the actual name or location of base object from client applications. Synonyms can be used in a variety of scenarios, such as providing access to objects outside of a database, abstracting changes to object names and locations, simplifying complex object names, and simplifying SQL queries. Synonyms can be created for various types of objects, including CLR assemblies, stored procedures, table valued functions, scalar functions, and aggregate functions. Question number 122. If you are a SQL developer, how can you delete duplicate records in a table with no primary key? If you are a SQL developer and you need to delete duplicate records in a table that has no primary key, there are several ways to achieve this. One approach is to use a temporary table and move the duplicates to it, then delete them from the original table, and finally move the remaining unique rows back to original table. This can be done using SQL script that identifies duplicate rows and moves them to temporary table before deleting them from original table. Another approach, which is simpler and more efficient, is to use the row underscore number function, which was introduced in SQL Server 2005. This function allows you to partition the data based on one or more columns and assign a unique number to each row within each partition. You can then delete all the rows that have a dup rank value greater than 1, indicates that they are duplicates. It is recommended that you have an index on the table that uses the key underscore value as an index key and includes any sorting columns that you might have used in order by expression to optimize the performance of this method. Another alternative is to use a sort operator in an SSIS package to identify and delete duplicates. You can add a sort operator from SSIS toolbox for SQL delete operation and join it with the source data. The configuration of sort operator involves selecting the columns that contain duplicate values. In summary, there are multiple approaches to deleting duplicate records in a table without a primary key in SQL Server, including using a temporary table, the row number function, and an SSIS package. Each approach has its advantages and disadvantages, and the best option depends on the specific circumstances of your scenario. Question number 123. Is it possible to import data directly from T-SQL commands without using SQL Server Integration Service? If so, what are the commands? Yes, it is possible to import data directly from T-SQL commands without using SQL Server Integration Services, that is SSIS services. Here are some commands that can be used for importing data. BCP, bulk copy program, is a command line utility that can be used to copy large amount of data into or out of SQL Server databases. BCP can be used to import data from text files or export data to text files. Open row set. The open row set functions allows you to access remote data by connecting to a remote data source through an OLEDB provider. This function can be used to import data from a remote data source or an external files into a SQL Server table. Bulk insert. Bulk insert is a T-SQL statement that can be used to import data from a text file or a file in a binary format into a SQL Server table. This statement is similar to BCP, but it is executed as a T-SQL statement rather than a command line utility. Open query. The open query function allows you to execute a pass-through query against a linked server. This function can be used to import data from a remote database into a SQL Server table. Open data source. The open data source function allows you to connect to a data source on a remote server. This function can be used to import data from a remote data source into a SQL Server table. It is important to note that each of these commands has its own syntax and requirement for importing data and may have different performance characteristics depending on the size format of the data being imported. It is recommended to consult the official Microsoft documentation for each command before using them. For you can use a Microsoft documentation, that is the best source for using any type of command or importing data. Question number 124. What is the native system stored procedure to execute a command against all databases? The native system stored procedure that can be used to execute a command against all databases in SQL Server is sp_underscore ms4 CSDB. This system stored procedure accepts a @command parameter which can be used to issue a command against all database using the question as a placeholder for database name. The stored procedure is extremely useful for pulling together metadata about various databases and can be used to query a system table from all databases including the system databases. It is also possible to limit the scope of sp_ms4 ACGDB stored procedure by excluding specific databases using if statement. However, it is worth noting that the native solution has some limitations and can skip databases, fail against database with problematic identifiers, and add options such as executing only against system databases or databases in a specific recovery model. In this case, it may be better to use a replacement for sp_ms4 HDB that avoids these problems and adds additional options. Question number 125. How can a SQL developer prevent T-SQL code from running on a production SQL server? As a SQL developer, there are several methods that can be used to prevent T-SQL code from running on a production SQL server. One approach is to capture the SQL server name and include appropriate logic and scripts and stored procedure to prevent them from running on production server. This can be accomplished by adding a check for the server name in the code and issuing a return command if it matches the production server name. Another useful technique is to use the IntelliSense feature of SQL Server Management, that is SSMS, to check the syntax of a query before running it. This feature will highlight any text errors with a red squiggly line, and hovering over the line will display the error message. It's also recommended to use color code SQL Server connection in SSMS to avoid confusion between development and production servers. Additionally, you can set the noexec NOEXEC all capital options to prevent execution of a query and only compile the code for syntax and object reference errors by including the set noexec on statement at the beginning of a script. It will check for any syntax errors and object reference errors during compilation, but will not execute the actual query. Similarly, you can ensure all queries are executed within a transaction, which allows you to double check the result before committing or rolling back the transaction if needed. It's important to note that preventing SQL injection attacks should also be a priority for SQL developers. One method to protect against SQL injection is to properly cleanse user input, but if you are unable to modify the application, then this option may not be feasible. In conclusion, SQL developers have several options to prevent T-SQL code from running on a production SQL server, including server name checks, syntax validation, color-coded SQL server connection, noexec and transaction options, and proper input cleansing to prevent SQL injection attacks. Question number 126. How do you maintain database integrity where deletions from one table will automatically cause deletions in another table? To maintain database integrity where deletions from one table will automatically cause deletions in another table, you can create a trigger that will automatically delete elements in second table when elements from the first table are removed. This is done by creating the after trigger to do deletions automatically after performing TDL on the table. Maintaining data integrity in a database application means ensuring that the data in the table that the application manipulates conform to appropriate business rules. To do so, A business rules specifies a condition or relationship that must always be true or must always be false. Question number 127. What port does SQL Server run on? SQL Server typically runs on the port 1433 for TCP and port 1434 for UDP. However, if you are using dynamic ports configuration, the assigned port may be different. To find the assigned port, you can follow these steps. Go to the SQL Server Configuration Manager, expand SQL Server Network Configuration, and click on Protocols for instance name. Right click on TCP IP and select Properties. Under the IP addresses tab, scroll down to IPA group to see the current assigned TCP dynamic SQL port. If you are having the trouble connecting to SQL, so it's possible that Windows firewall is blocking the port. You can configure the Windows firewall to allow SQL Server access by following these steps. Determine the current status of firewall for your operating system. Configure the firewall setting with either Microsoft Management Console or Nets and restrict the opening of the port to incoming connections from specific computers or local subnet to reduce how much your computer is exposed to malicious users. What is the SQL case statement used for? Explain with an example. This question number 128. The SQL case statement is used to evaluate multiple conditions and return a single value based on outcome of condition. If functions like series of nested if statements, there are two types of SQL case statements: simple and searched. In a simple used SQL case statement, a single expression is evaluated against a series of conditions. The first condition that evaluates to true returns the corresponding result expression. If no condition is true, the statement returns the result in else clause if it exists. For example, SQL code: select column name, case gender, when M then male, when F then female, else unknown, end as gender full. From table name, this statement check the gender column and assign the value male if it is M, female if it is F, and unknown if it is anything else. A search SQL case statement allows for more complex evaluation of condition, including use of logical operators. In search case statement, each condition is evaluated separately and returns a result expression if it is true. For example, select column name case when condition 1, then result 1, when condition 2, then result 2, else result 3, and as column underscore alias from table underscore name. This statement evaluates each condition in order and returns the corresponding result expression when a condition is true. Overall, the SQL case statement is a useful tool for conditional data manipulation in SQL queries. Question number 129. What are the risks of storing a hibernate-managed object in cache? How do you overcome the problems? Hibernate is a popular object relational mapping (ORM) framework used in Java applications. When using Hibernate, it is possible to store Hibernate-managed object in a cache. While this can provide a performance benefit, there are also potential risks associated with this approach. One risk of storing Hibernate-managed objects in cache is that it can lead to memory issues, especially in large projects. Since a lot of object hibernate, POJO object need to be created and stored, the memory footprint of application can become too large. Another risk is that data in the cache may become stable or outdated if the database is updated outside of application. To overcome these problems, it is important to use caching strategies that are appropriate for specific use case. Hibernate provides several caching strategies, including first level cache, second level cache, and query cache. First level cache is enabled by default in Hibernate and store the data in session itself. This cache is local to session and is cleared when session is closed. The second level cache is shared between sessions and can be configured to use different caching providers such as eCache or Hazelcast. Second level cache can reduce the number of database queries and improve performance, but require careful configuration to avoid stale data. Query cache stores the result of queries so that they can be retrieved quickly in subsequent executions. To avoid memory issue, it is important to configure the cache appropriately and set a limit on maximum number of objects to be cached. To avoid stale data. It is important to use appropriate cache eviction policies and ensure that the cache is invalidated when the underlying data is updated. It is also important to carefully consider which data should be cached and which should not be cached. In summary, while caching hibernate managed object can provide performance, when it is important to carefully consider the potential risks and choose an appropriate caching strategy to avoid memory issues and stale data. Question number 130. When is the use of update underscore statistics command? The update underscore statistics command is used in MS SQL Server to update query optimization statistics on a table or indexed view. These statistics help the query optimizer generate an efficient query plan, which is essential for good database performance in general. The query optimizer updates these statistics automatically. However, there may be case when where manually updating the statistics using update underscore statistics command can lead to improved query performance. For example, if the table contains a large amount of data, if the data has undergone significant changes, then automatic update of statistics may not be sufficient. In such cases, manually updating the statistics using the update statistics command can help ensure that the query optimizer has up to date information about data distribution, which can lead to improved query performance. To use update underscore statistics command, one can either call the stored procedure sp underscore update stats to update statistics for all table in database, or update statistics for a special table by right clicking on the table in SQL Server Management Studio, selecting properties, and then select update statistics for these columns. Thank you.